Get started, I also want to just lay the ground that at Tomorrow Movement, we are a proud, inclusive, multiracial movement, and we know that dominant systems like colonization, white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy means that power imbalances can and do show up in our space as a movement, which impacts who feels comfortable talking in the space. And also that we are on, I want to acknowledge that we're on all jotting from stolen land and pay my respect to Aboriginal elders, both past and present, and their ongoing resistance to colonisation and the current structures and systems that we're in. And I always think that's an important thing to talk about as we're talking about campaigning and the far right, is that it wasn't always like this. This country had hundreds of families and cultures and nations. And this is a beautiful depiction by Daniel Boyd, how it was seen as Treasure Island from the period of colonization. So reflecting on, yeah, sovereignty has never been ceded, and how can we work towards that within the context of being the far left. So these are the things that I think must be included when we talk about the far left and when we're talking about decolonisation and Indigenous sovereignty, centering land back, treaty rights, Indigenous self-determination as a foundational to liberation, anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, so opposition to corporate power, which we're very upfront with at Tomorrow Movement against big business, neoliberalism and global exploitation, abolitional politics, talking about rejecting punitive systems, so police, prisons, borders, in favor of transformative justice and community care. And I really want to draw attention to transformative justice rather than restorative justice, because in a lot of scenarios, what are we restoring the justice to? All the scenarios. So yeah, merely want to call that out, as we should be transforming people's experiences. Horizontal organizing, which is like a preference to non-hierarchical consensus-based decision-making over centralized authority. Intersectional liberation, so understanding oppression as interconnected, so looking at race, gender, class, disability, and resisting single issue politics. And direct action and militant resistance. This is difficult to do in a not NGO, but acknowledging that it is core is willingness to engage in disruptive progress, protest, and mutual aid. And skepticism of electoralism, so belief that system change happens through mass movements, not just voting or reformist policy. So I also thought that one is an important one to draw attention to, because at Tomorrow Movement, we have the Youth Voter Block, and that is a vehicle for youth empowerment and engagement within the system and structure as it is. But for me, it's moving people or young people from passively being involved or maybe consulted on the issue to actively being a part of a mass movement, and taking the power back into their own hands and campaigning for things too. But I thought it was important to define what the far left or what progressive spaces are before moving on to what this session is about, is how do we beat the far right? That in itself, I think, can be defined by things like ultranationalism, belief in race and ethnic superiority, anti-immigrant rhetoric, and often white supremacist ideologies. Authoritarianism and hierarchy, support for strongman leadership, militarized policing, and suppression of dissent, traditionalism and reactionary values, opposition to LGBTIQ+ rights, feminism, secularism, and desire to return to traditional social orders. Conspiracy theories and anti-intellectualism, belief in narratives like the Great Replacement, QAnon, or denial of systematic oppression, which the last one is probably what we see a lot on social media in the comments and all that kind of stuff. It's oh, we should be able to speak to everybody the same without acknowledging systemic oppression. Violent vigilantism, support for armed militias, border patrols, and extrajudicial violence. Things like the Proud Boys, Patriot Front, those groups that take it into their own hands to do that ultranationalism. Corporate power is an interesting one, because while some far-right groups oppose globalism, many align with capitalist oligarchs, which we've very much seen in the US if it maintains racial and class hierarchy. So, and anti-abolition, so expansion of policing, prisons, and punitive systems to control marginalized groups. thought it would be good to start on and make sure that we're on the same page on what is campaign organizing as a starting point. So, campaign organizing to me is about using the resources we have to build the power we need to achieve the change we want. But at the end of the day, I think it is about changing power dynamics by creating a collection of people taking organized action for a collective goal. So, becoming a social movement. And I really love this example from Terakura O'Connell-Rapia, who is the 350.org.au CEO, who talks about in the social movement ecosystem. So like all of the different organization individuals, we usually fit into one of these, which is like feed a person a fish, feed them for a day, which is all about, personal transformation, how we're doing mutual aid, we're supporting people one-on-one, or we can be teaching a person to fish, feed them for a lifetime. We're working on like educating people on how to navigate systems and bureaucracy, or if the people in power are polluting the river, we need a campaign. So ultimately, that's what campaign organizing is there are people on the ground who are supporting people to navigate it as is. But when our system is as it is, with the pollution and the structural things that are happening, we need a campaign and we need to organize people to become a mass movement to shift that power. And this is like such a great, simple analogy on shifting power dynamics. We need to organize people together, and the vehicle in which we do that is a campaign. So people taking collective action towards a goal. And when we're organizing, we're thinking about how can we build power through people to make change. So this is a Marshall-Ganz quote that I really love because it encapsulates it's more than about just us. It's about how are we building the people around us to make that change, to build that mass movement across the board. And when we're making that change, the things that I think about when I'm thinking about campaign organizing is, okay, when we're organizing something, are we looking to how we're going to hit structural change? Are we looking at the policies, practices, and resource flows that need to be impacted within those power dynamics for that structural change? So, like thinking about the visible power that we could look to change. So, in terms of the government, we might want to change the government's visible power policy. We want to change their practices. We want to change their resource flows. Or relational change. Do we want to shift power dynamics or relationships and connections, such as like lobbyists who are setting the agenda behind the scenes? And what are the relationships and connections within that? So like thinking at all the CEOs that are meeting with the politicians, like their relational change that we're looking at, how can we impact? Then the last one is transformative change. So looking at the thoughts and feelings and the like people's belief systems is probably the best way to think about it, is like how are we shifting the public sentiment so that the policy or practices of resource flows or the power dynamics and relationships can't be shifted. So like currently as a progressive front trying to shift people's sentiment on public donations, right? And like lobbyists and all that kind of stuff, we need to move that into a state where it is no longer possible for those lobbyists to have those power dynamics and impact the structural policy practices and resource flows. Or thinking about marriage equality is another great example of like how that would never be appealed because of the public sentiment or mental modes is so set that that is the norm. So thinking about the 6 conditions of system change when we're campaign organizing is looking at how do we hit all of these. And as our organizer, whether it's digital or in person, our role is to bring people together and challenging them to act on behalf of their shared values and beliefs. How can we get people not just to like inform or like, educated? How can we get them to act on behalf of their beliefs? So if organizing is all about building power through people to make change, digital organizing is about just doing that online and using the internet as a vehicle. And digital organizing provides us the opportunity to foster offline relationships en masse by leveraging online platforms and tools. How can we build people's engagement, build their understanding through online, but getting them to do offline calls to action, such as going to events, doing visibility things? It's like, how can we reinforce offline calls to action? And this is to really establish, maintain, and amplify a presence for people to take action. digital organizing is not a replacement for in-person organizing. So there's been like quite a bit of research on why it's not, but the two that I found the most interesting was from the Analyst Institute, who talked about supporters who receive personalized contact, which is one-on-one calls or meetings, are 2 times more likely to return or do something in that campaign rather than those that just got mass emails. So it's really important to still have that personal communication with somebody, and that can be a phone call, that can be an online meeting, but it's like that one-to-one, not that en masse communication. And also there's another one as well, like that has a 50% higher retention rate than people just got email blast. So there's some really big research around why you need to have that one-on-one personalization as well as the digital. And I think for me, this is where we can beat the far right in Australia, is using digital organizing to supplement and boost our in-person organizing, or those relationships that we're forming. And how I'd like to think about digital organizing and where it fits is it's ultimately supporting you stepping up people's engagement within your campaign. So this is the ladder of engagement, and I like to put active words in front of that. Digital organizing is about how can you get somebody from observing your campaign to following your campaign and supporting it, to endorsing your campaign, to actively contributing, to owning, because we want to make the biggest movement. We want to build the power of the people to make that active change. And as an inclusive journey, we need to also understand that everybody is on their own journey. And that's probably like our biggest strength as a progressive movement, is that we, know that everybody is on their journey. We know the system that we're operating in, and we're about how can we support and move people to like be on the same page with us. So when you're establishing like a digital campaign, I would recommend like looking about the top 3 of what digital organizing can do for you, and then turning into like the goals of how you're going to do that, or what are the different ways that you can do those things. Tomorrow Movement's digital organizing fits into that overarching one, is that fostering offline relationships en masse by leveraging online platforms and tools. So the Tomorrow Movement Youth Voter Block campaign is trying to do that by creating a sense of belonging and shared purpose among young people. So like I talked about before, vehicle of voting and the power of 47% is to foster those offline relationships, leveraging online tools to be able to do that. We want to reinforce offline calls to action by equipping young people with the tools and knowledge to take action, and also turn online engagement into real world action. And we also want to establish, maintain, and amplify our presence to organize people to take action. How we're doing that is making sure that the Youth Voter Block is widely recognized and understood as a powerful movement for young people. And when we're thinking about what are the ways that people can observe our campaign and really get involved with these initial stages, or the framework that I found really useful to think about the way that people are actively observing our campaign, is what are the different media that we can use to make sure that people are seeing us, they are seeing our calls to action, they're seeing our campaign. So this is the PESO model. This is like the way that I'm like, how are people observing our campaign? How are they getting involved? And to break that down a little bit more, the first one is to thinking about, okay, owned media. And even though P is first said PESO, owned is the one that you have the most control over, especially in nonprofits. So the easiest one for most nonprofits and campaigns is having a website. And the pros of that is like you completely control it, you're not moderated on it, but there are like cons in the time that it takes you to establish it and maintain it. But it's ongoingly like a place where actively it brings in people. And that's because 95% of the population use the internet. Now, there are obviously regional areas where that 5% is predominantly there, but across Australia, that is the statistic that is using the internet. And 89% of people use the search engine within the last year, and 95% of those 89 use Google. So having a website is a really important way to get people observing your digital campaign and understanding what you're all about and what the things that your campaign is looking to deliver. Doing a website is actually quite easy. I feel like we should talk about more easy, that it's you pick a campaign name and you purchase the website domain name. And it's really usually like a 3 or 4 step thing to do to raise awareness about your campaign. But when you're doing that, just make sure that you check that you can get the name on social media campaigns first. Purchase a website name. These are 2 websites that are really easy to use. You can see here that they're also as ethical as you can be in the tech business. But what you do is like, okay, I want a website. I know my campaign name. You literally put it in that search bar and you press search. And then if it's available, you just purchase the domain name. There you go. You're ready to start your website. You can see here that in terms of pricing as well, it's quite low. And DreamHost is $9 for a domain for the year. And Venture IP is like $20 to $5 for the year to buy that domain name. And once you have that all set up, you can then pick which place you want to create your website on. So you've got the www component, which is the domain. So how do you want to create your website? And these are the 2 that I would strongly recommend using, either one of those. So these are the 2 that I'm aware of are the least problematic in terms of tech. WordPress is the one that we use for Tomorrow Movement, and it's really good in terms of drag and drop website builders or templates, and it can integrate with something called relationship management systems, what I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. But it does really well in Google searches, but the only downside is you need to install something called plugins. They're not hard to do. You just need to know that you need to download them. So just a fun fact, just Google WordPress plugins and see which ones that you want. There's also Squarespace. There are heaps of website templates to also pick from. You can build your own, and it's great to use for smaller campaigns, but it is so restrictive in terms of design and functionality. So that's probably something to think about. If you're only going to have a couple website pages, then it's fine. But if you're going to start doing, lots of different campaigns and eventually you're going to build, then I would go with something that's a little bit more complicated up front, like WordPress. Now, on WordPress, there's 2 main components of it, which is you add like a container layout to the page, and then you pick which thing you want in it. So you can see here, like I want on this one, the layout to be like a full screen width, and then I can pick if I want audio on the other side. So creating a website, though, is very easy in terms of like the different steps that you have to do to create the relevant page. And then when you've figured out, okay, I've got my website, I kind of know what layouts, figuring out what kind of media you want is really important. Because like what are people going to search about your campaign? Like what are the different topics? I like to think of in Tomorrow Movement, we do 3 main ones, and something for you to think about your campaign. We do pages which are about the story of self, which is values and vision. So like really getting people to understand like what Tomorrow Movement is all about, the story of us. We do that through blogs and the get involved pages, so people understand, how they fit into the movement. They can see other people involved. It's really about creating a community feel on the page. And the story of now, it's like campaign information, like creating that sense of urgency and involvement for all different levels. And the story of Self-Us Now is a part of Marshall-Ganz's organizing theory. It's a component within story, and it's really important to think about how you're going to encapsulate that on your website. How are you telling the story for people to get involved? Because it's not facts and figures that change people's minds, it's stories. And that's a really hard thing for a lot of activists to kind of, like if we just tell enough people about the facts, they will believe us. But we got to think about what is the story, or like the assumptions or the beliefs or the other things that the right is telling, that means that people aren't going to believe those facts. We need to be able to tell moving stories that make people connect to our campaign, to connect to why they're involved with our campaign and the urgency of our campaign to really get involved. It's not just enough to let people know, statistics. So thinking about how you can incorporate that onto your website, keeping it up to date as much as possible is something to consider. And another way for people to observe your campaign is then through shared media. So through shared media, it's like considering, okay, what is the content that I own that I can share on a platform that you don't own? So what happens next when you post it is out of your control. So like the engagement and also the moderation of the content. So an example of shared media, the most prominent one that we do in our progressive spaces is social media content. And this is important for us to do because a majority of people spend an hour and 53 minutes per day on social media. And like that's the average. I know that most people, including myself, have an average that is much, much higher of what we spend on social media. But also 46% of 18 to 24-year-olds use social media for their main source of the news. So this is something massive to think about when we're creating content, when we're on those spaces, is that young people who are fairly susceptible to the far right, as we know that the loneliness epidemic, just becoming adults and learning about the world. So that's why engaging in shared media spaces is really important to make sure that young people feel heard and they understand that there's other spaces that they can get involved with. I just wanted to draw attention to this in terms of like shared media spaces as well, or like things you should think about when you're prioritizing your time. So, in terms of the youngest audiences, Instagram and TikTok are them, and at Tomorrow Movement, that's our jam. We're really focused on organizing 18 to 35-year-olds, so that's where we prioritize our time. And you can see that they have quite large reaches within Australia. And TikTok as well, that 42 hours per month of engagement. But yeah, 18 to 24-year-olds and 25 to 34 make up 71% of users. But Facebook is something that still needs to be engaged with. But the main things that I think we should consider with shared media is how do we make the most accessible content? Because that's how we grow our movement, is through being inclusive and making sure that everybody can get involved and see and what's happening. So this is from something called the Website Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it's an international set. And these are the things that they say to consider when creating anything online. So is it perceivable? If I can't see the content, how do I know what it is? Operable, can it be used easier? Or is it understandable? The content is clear, readable by a range of audiences, and robust. Is it compatible with different screen sizes? So coming to like the first one, which is how do we create perceivable content? The biggest one to take into consideration is something called color contrast, which is a key factor in making it accessible to all users. So really looking at, would somebody with low vision be able to read this text? Can you easily read the text against a background? And you can actually check the color contrast ratio using something called a contrast checker. And it's actually really, really simple to do. What you just need to do is you need to grab the background color, so that black color, and then you grab the front color, which is the white, and you put that into a contrast checker, and it will let you know how perceivable it is. You can see here that the only one that actually passes the color contrast checker is this black and white text. And that's how you can see over here. It's like a pass, 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 pass. But below here, you can see they're all fails there. So that's that background color, and that's that foreground color there as how you check for the color contrast. And it's a really accessible tool. If you look up, literally color contrast checker, these are all the ones. I like the second one, colorcontrast.cc, because I find it the prettiest website, but all of them do exactly the same thing. There are other options to making really easy, accessible content that's fast to do. I think the biggest thing in movements is that we put so much pressure on ourselves to create videos or to create beautiful graphics, when really we can create easy, simple content that is accessible. Like we could just pop a photo up with a meaningful caption that actually does the best. Like a personal photo with a political caption does the best across all social media. Photo with text, you can do that in your phone gallery. You could even use paint. Love paint. Paint's the best. You can do so much with it. So you don't have to do fancy graphic design for content. You can just chuck a photo up from an event, or literally that issue photo, the one on the end, that was just taking photos of posters around the city, and that got 64 likes. So you can do that with something like at a rally, or like in your community, if it's like about the park or, about the city or Sydney or something like that. It's more about really getting out there and having accessible content that is meaningful to people. Does it share and tell the story of your campaign that people will relate to? And when you're telling that story, it's thinking about how can you make it understandable, like making sure that the understandable goes onto one line, not over two. So is your content easy to read? Is the design consistent and clear? So making sure that you're avoiding long paragraphs and sentences. Can your copy be scannable? So on a website or on a graph, it's like using bold and color to emphasize key points. Only use italics for supplementary information, because italics is the stuff that people don't actually pay attention to. They will glance over it in a graphic design thing. And you can use tools like Hemingway to check any clarity, tense, or grammar. And surprisingly, the federal government style manual is actually quite good and like breaking down plain language and lay language when it comes to making understandable content. The other thing, just to make sure that all of your videos also have captions if you do them. Like, videos are something great to do, but they're only good if everybody can understand what's happening in them. And a majority of people actually don't watch videos with their sound on. On Instagram, if you do make something, you can see here that it's like 4 steps maximum to add captions to your video. But making videos also doesn't have to be difficult too. All you need to do is make sure that the first 10 seconds are the most important. So make sure you have the most important thing within them in those first 10 seconds. 90% of Surya's videos were actually with a brick wall behind him. But these videos got thousands and thousands of views because it's more about what you're saying and the story that you're telling to people rather than the fancy graphics. It's really easy to put grid lines on in your camera as well. Really recommend doing that, because if you want to start get fancy and like editing your video and like maybe cutting out any pauses and stuff like that, it makes it easier to edit when your head's in the same spot all the time. So yeah, chuck grid lines on your camera so you don't have to start again. Other things you can do is really, this is something that the independents and the teals do really, really well, is they utilize their earned media. Any media that's published by a third party or external channel without payment. So like including publications and targeted news outlets. When you get into a newspaper, mentions or reviews or endorsements for supporters or backlinks from other websites. How can you use it across your other channels? So, okay, like, the Guardian's covered me, or this supporter thinks I'm really cool. How can I really use that to amplify my message across the platforms that I own? So examples on how to do this, and it actually boosts your legitimacy because you've got like a third party vouching for you. Take a screenshot of the article and just post it as blank, or put it on your website as a link in a blog post. It's really easy to like take something that has already been done by somebody else and be like, hey, look how cool I am. So always considering across, like, how can I take this one thing and make it go across all of the different channels to boost the amount of people that are observing my campaign? And the whole purpose of making content to get people observing your campaign is move people into following your campaign. And why that's so important is because we want to get people to be able to send them asks to get involved to our in-person organizing, right? So we've got people observing them, but things get lost in the digital sphere, right? Like, we can't rely on our website to come up in Google. They need to follow us on Instagram through our shared media. So we really need to think about, okay, how can we move people into following us, to getting direct calls to action to get involved with things. So the way that you can do that is through key things, through your own media or your website. You'll probably see most nonprofit or campaigns do this. They'll have a sign up page. And the sign up page is anything that just has your first name, your last name, your email address, and maybe your postcode. It is the lowest barrier ask that you can have to get supporters engaged within your movement. It's just like I'm interested in getting involved, and it's your role as like an organizer, as somebody within the movement to figure out, okay, what can I do to get people more motivated within a campaign? Another way to do that is a petition page. Again, the same number of fields. You might have a mobile number as well. You can also have email action campaigns. You might have done it before, like a do-gooder, which you send an MP one, or a download a resource page where people pop in their details first. So that's like allowing people an opportunity to start following your campaign and getting more and more involved. Another way that you can do that in terms of on your shared media is like you're having a link tree, which is a really simple version website, but also through the highlights. And this is something like you don't have to be an organization to do this. It's just like, how can we provide it really easy access to people getting involved in our campaigns? To get people from following, we want them to get them endorsing. So they've shown their initial interest by sharing their contact details, but endorsers take a bigger step. They're like ready to be publicly associated with us and be physically present. So it's a significant jump in commitment going from, oh, like I'm just going to give you my email and like sometimes I'm okay with getting updates to you, to really considering, okay, like how are we going to make somebody into potentially like interested in volunteering with us, and what are the things that you can do to do that? And I think this is like very much think about how you create a friendship. Exactly the same in building a mass movement. It's intentional. Make sure that you know the person, right? Like you're addressing them by their first name. You're not sending them stuff about a different state, for goodness sake. You know, what's the value and them being involved with you? Like tonight, it's like, yeah, this you could use this information in any different campaign across the board. There's like a clear value exchange. Making sure that you are giving them stuff that they're interested in and that you're like not spamming them, but also like not contacting them so infrequently that they forget about you is something really to think about when it comes to digital organizing. And how you can do that is through something called a relationship management system, which is like understanding the full picture of someone's relationship with your campaign and sending them personalized communication. The example that you probably all have on your phone is like your contacts app. Your contacts app is a relationship management system where you put in people's phone number and their email address and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to campaigns, there's a couple more fields and functions that they have that you can use, but it's really important that you're tailoring communication because it increases your supporter retention when it comes to we want to build the biggest alternative to the far right possible. And how we do that within Tomorrow Movement, and something that I would just beyond like on a personal level recommend in terms of like ease and cost is use your action network for your relationship management system. Through that, it shows people's email, it shows if they've come to an event, it shows what forms that they use and any demographic information. And with that, you can do really cool like ladder automation, which is so easy to do. You just need to like start playing around with how you get involved with them. You can create actions such as emails and forms and petitions to get involved with that. So an example of that, how it looks like in Tomorrow Movement, is when somebody completes an online sign-up form, the ladder automation will check which location that they're from. On the day of sign up, the email is sent to people location specific and has a link to the organizer webpage with the video. But the first email that you get is like, yes, welcome to here. It's got a video in it because it's like, hey, we're normal people too. Please help us build this mass movement, and letting people know about the upcoming things that they're going to get involved with. 2 days later, there's an email that's sent out about involvement and comms preferences. We're building this for scale, right? We're using digital organizing to supplement our in-person organizing. And what happens when all of a sudden you get in the news and then 100 people sign up? Like you can't call 100 people in a day. They're not going to all pick up. Some people prefer to be contacted by email or SMS. So it's really important to set up like the automation or use digital organizing to supplement your personal relationships. So then we ask people about how to get involved and their comms preferences. And then 2 days later, for our areas that we have lots of in-person events, we will send an email about upcoming events. So, like I said, that's supplemented with like a non-digital organizing flow. And there are other really cool like email direct communication or SMS communication that you can use within your campaign to grow it. We've got a welcome series, but you can also do impact updates, letting people know about local issue alerts, letting people know about stories, invitations, what are action outcomes, or behind the scene updates. So everything that you're doing is trying to build the movement, is trying to like foster people to get involved in whatever capacity that they can. And there's also different types of SMS direct communication that you can do too. And everything that we do is like really trying to answer the question on like who should do digital organizing. Anybody, please do digital organizing. It's like whichever level that you can start or get involved. There are so many different medias that you can try. There's so many different things that work. It's just about starting and getting involved and seeing what sticks.